anything like anyone expects. What if the accounts of Atlantis having...
Genetic engineering. So you actually have 10 kingdoms for Atlantis. The one central kingdom.
Sandy, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Happy travels.
Thank you.
Okay, man.
Wow,
I for an article in a local magazine on an event here that happened in 1755. It's called the
Temple of Poseidon. In your opinion, what do you think are some of the most compelling
specific clues on top of all the rest? Probably the most important one. You see the black, white, and red rock. Plato said...
A menhir refers to one of more than 50,000 monoliths or standing stones deliberately...
Some great big conflagration, possibly like Noah's flood. We're talking of something that's incredibly old.
That's basically what the ancient astronaut theory suggests, that a long time ago... I can't wait. What else are you going to show me?
This cosmic egg has got me thinking that the story of Atlantis... Peter has brought a bathymetric chart showing the areas around Sylvs that sank over the last few thousand years.
Is about 9¼ kilometers from where you can see it to the sea, which is the exact distance. Then an embankment that was 3 stadia, and finally the harbour area, which is 3 stadia. Well, Plato made it clear these gods were not some
Here has given me a lot to think about. Atlantis, to me, is highly fascinating because, in your opinion, where do you think the story for Atlantis...
This stone block called VB444 is the so-called Sumerian king's list.
When I was in Portugal, I met with author Peter Daughtry, and in his book he proposed the idea...
This female will give birth to a child. The child has, of course, the skeleton, the bone...
ideas for Atlantis. Do you think that Atlantis might have been this culture that was not just in one place? For my last stop, I've traveled to the Greek island of Santorini, semicircular shape. But although it certainly bears a similarity to Plato's description of it, the ruins of Akrotiri clearly show evidence of advanced architecture. Is it possible that these hybrid beings were the real Plato's clues about Atlantis? But some don't. Right. Further down the mountain, I met once again with writer Jonathan Bright and discovered that he had something quote-unquote sacred happened up here a very long time ago. And they weren't a chance to meet with some really cool researchers. But this last stop has me convinced to pursue the truth in search of aliens. I'm in Poland at the former headquarters for Hitler's subterranean weapons project. The Nazis engaged their top scientists to develop a number of what they referred to as advanced military on the planet, boasting an arsenal that included guided missiles.
Nazi equivalent of the Area 51, I guess.
Igor is taking me to a place called the Henge, which is...
The entire valley was sealed off from the outside world, and this structure stands...
And that large chains would have been attached to the bizarre structure so that the bell-shaped craft...
And it is causing an anti-gravitational effect.
How this drill was actually used in this context here.
What they have discovered is that one may induce that the bell was a main part of a propulsion system of a flying craft, not a flying craft DSS, at the end of the war.
The way Igor describes Hitler's SS troops took possession of the downed craft and carried it away to their early burial mounds, in which the deceased were seated in an upright position and
stupa is a shape which you find in the Mahabharata, in the old Indian epic. There is small vehicle called Vimanas, because according to their belief, the stupa is the small vehicle which today we would say mother spaceship.
You know, there are some that have suggested that some of invaluable information. Thank you very much, Eric, as always.
Thank you, Giorgio.
That time travel is, in fact, achievable based on his famous theory of relativity. Questions.
Not at all.
I actually went to Poland to look at the henge because bell shape or cone shape in any way, shape, or form is conducive to wind tunnel tests
on a bell-shaped object.
I want to find out whether or not a vehicle to actually fire up the engine.
To make something like this work requires...
Time machine or something like that. My mind, was blown. What do you think?
Well, first of all,
Aerodynamically sound.
Let's fire her up.
The bell-shaped design performed in the wind tunnel, I expected that it would produce a lot of drag because it doesn't look...
Is an adventure.
I now know that
one of the photos I took in the mid-1980s. This is where we found what appeared to be a pattern of tree damage. It ranges from being a very sophisticated power source to some type of anti-gravity machine. And we're standing only several feet away from the object. They estimate that this thing was approximately maybe
So this was the general area.
right, it's deep inside the wooded area.
So you're telling me it's
Knocked
down
out
there,
in this
right?
general.
this is quite fascinating.
Perhaps also through time, in search of aliens.
I'm in the Scottish Highlands on Loch Ness. On the rise, and there have been accounts of similar cryptids from all over the planet. Canada, of a beast of enormous size. Almost immediately, dozens of
That's true. So what about these things right here? Do you make these?
that's how I fund
That quartz has the ability to convert the Earth's natural electrical vibrations into usable
still
energy.
optimistic.
What are some of the most compelling sightings or reports that you're familiar with?
the best thing I've ever heard.
The Loch.
Well, there's people that think this is a porthole to a hollow Earth.
An alien craft. It's far too early for me to make that determination, but I definitely know.
Actually.
The way that sonar works is as you're going through the water, you send out a click of sound in the middle of it.
Yeah,
on the
exactly.
lock.
I mean, that was actually my next question. How would this, what we see here,
With a very brave American called Dan Taylor. The vessel wasn't quite finished utterly. So the question arose, what next?
Can you imagine yourself? Dates all the way back to 565 AD, when, according to legend, an Irish missionary area. Now, why would they spend so much time carving images of this creature if it was purely...
Katie,
Hi, how are you?
pleasure to meet you. I'm
Pleasure to
Giorgio.
meet you too.
How are you?
Nice to meet you.
So this is the place.
I'd give anything to go back at that time and grab my camera faster or at
concerning
least
a
have
lake monster, which by some accounts was 30 feet long. By the late 19th century...
It's nicely protected. I like that.
Yes. So this is the original photograph. She took the photo and then dropped to her knees, realizing,
ever. Now, does some large underwater creature really exist? And if so,
Is the story of a man and the story of a turtle walking through the universe.
archaeologists there will tell you that this is depicting the ancient legends of the giant flying turtles.
What if the key to solving the mystery may not be finding some giant underwater monster?
We weren't so far apart hundreds of millions of years ago. Back when the Atlantic Ocean was closed, people have cited Champ independently. You have to place some stock in that body of observations.
And the people that I've talked to, the experts, one thing that I found interesting is when the geologists...
Both Lake Champlain and Loch Ness were formed due to tectonic plate shifts.
Being generated. Okay. That means that we can create perhaps a traversable wormhole. So what we are seeing is space-time continuum with electromagnetism. We can create possibly wormholes.
Because that suggests that Earth was visited by extraterrestrials in the remote past. Many more places to explore, many more mysteries to solve. And that's why I'm off once again in search. Ground zero for modern-day UFO researchers. It's very exciting to go search of the Roswell Rock. My name is Giorgio Tsoukalos. Did you bring the rock?
Yeah, I did.
And is this the only space where it makes it spin?
No, the other circle.
Walking on the same tarmac.
So here's our pilot. How you doing? Ready to go?
Wow.
and finding this rock right here?
I think it's possible.
Because you compare that, and I mean it's not even the same category.
They're exactly identical.
Wow. So you clearly think that the crop circle wasn't man-made. Now, the fact that we have equal but opposite images of what appears to be the sun... One of the biggest questions concerning the Roswell rock is whether or not the design on it is man-made.
So if you want to give the rock...
That would help you out some.
Check it out. What are your impressions?
Half an hour.
Of course. This was supposed to be the ultimate proof that this is a microscope today, right?
We're going to look at it under a microscope, and we're going to look at your specimens, and we're going to talk about this is limestone. You see, I can easily cut it with the point of a knife.
You're cutting into this?
Well, I didn't think so, and actually...
So for all intents and purposes, this is a foreign object to this. I mean, it's as if this was carved with some type of a very fine knife. What would you recommend for our next tests?
Well, I think we need to look inside the rock.
And perform magnetic field tests. So Nathan,
Robert measure the field strength of the rock.
Cool. Let's get started.
All right.
Show us the goods.
Okay. What else we can see?
Whoa. Yeah. Into it to verify that it is in fact a solid rock and not some plaster cast made from a...
Yeah, Robert, you got to see this, buddy.
You have to see this. You're a bit emotional. It's okay.
To be. So at this point in time, I'm going to say even with this power, short of thin sectioning the rock, it might be kind of hard.
Passes them through a body and detects them, puts it through a computer, and makes images that you can interpret. If there's any density behind that, as if it were a pleat onto the
What
surface.
a week, huh? Man, before I tell you what I think, I want you to tell me.
My mind when we saw that.
Especially when I saw the incision marks under high magnification.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
You know, I hope that this won't be the last time that we see each other. But in the meantime, I'm off once again in search of aliens. I'm on my way to Washington State's Olympic our DNA to make us what we are today. There are depictions throughout the ancient world, but tales of mysterious hairy beasts can be found in culture.
The Olympic project's about 6 years old, and it's pretty much, it started out as a comprehensive camera trap program where we would camera trap a serious hotspot in Bigfoot activity.
Curiously, the Olympic mountain range
Didn't even take the time to put our backpacks on. We just grabbed them up and started running down the ridge.
I can't say specifically that it's the Sasquatch, but that's what interests people that are analyzing the audio.
Bigfoot. What? All of this is great, but as you all know, the real research takes place out in the field. So I would love something really is going on here, and so I'm very excited to be out here.
Just simply someone with a big foot walking around barefoot.
Check this out.
Usually last for 3 to 6 months, depending on how many pictures they're taking.
And it only picks up when there's movement. About what he thinks this creature is and is not. So, in your opinion, to make their presence known, and then there is a return clap or something like this, what's that all about?
You're probably referring to wood knocks.
Bigfoot isn't something that has just sprung up recently, but there are, in fact, legends.
Sit there and watch for a while, or we'll just keep following the roads and see what we see. Pretty impressive technology.
And Howe discovered a connection between Bigfoot and the unexplained phenomenon. Dr. Meldrum, there's one personal question that I would like to ask you, and that is, have you ever had that way, right?
Yes. Straight back.
This is a dark figure that was really tall and big. Stepped out of the brush on one side onto the roadway, and it commenced. I said, if I don't leave now, I'm going to die. So I turned and I ran the other way.
Many Native American myths include legends of creatures known as skinwalkers, humans who can change.
He's a shamanistic magician. He lives in a cave.
So you've got the cave diver. Is the Bigfoot a shapeshifter? Is it something else part of the time? Is that why we don't see it all the time? Do they have the kind of impact that these hybrid gods had? Are they showing us the way to something?
A hominid whose skeleton was discovered in Ethiopia in 1974. It is considered by some,
which is an earlier form of hominin, probably about 2 to 4 million years ago.
What would have to have occurred for such a thing to even happen?
An organism can be isolated. If we're talking about brain size, modern humans have a cranial capacity, about 1,200.
And not to be closed off to the possibility of asking a question, what if? And before some of us began traveling the world in search of aliens. I'm on my way to explore one of the most ancient and mysterious islands in the world. Older than the Great Pyramid in Egypt. But after a period of one country covers only 122 square miles, but it is as rich with mystery. There are over 100 sites on Malta that have these ruts or giant. If it were just a cart, then one could surmise that the width.
The first one was a sledge. Probably the oldest form of human transport, but
St. George's Bay, that baffles me most of all. So in St. George's Bay, Cyclops actually existed here, and if there might even be an extraterrestrial connection. This complex consists of 3 stone structures that are laid out in the pattern of a tree. He came to this conclusion because, based on the tilt of the earth found on the northwest coastline of France, here a collection of over thousands of years ago. As my search for clues continues, people erecting these enormous stone monoliths without the help of any large machinery. Now, if the spheres would have withstood the weight, 20 tons of, because the sphere theorists to believe that this temple dates back much earlier than 3600 BC. Almost 70 years after the Venus of Malta was discovered, a nearly identical statuette was found in Austria. In 1902, a strange underground temple
were found here, and also a place for worship.
Were true. Some even speculated that the skulls. You know, I was just at the Hypogeum, and they actually recommended that I should come and talk to you. Now, mainstream archaeologists believe that elongated skulls were achieved by ancient people wrapping boards. Right.
Completely fused.
That's fascinating. So, are there any plans of potentially doing any DNA testing on these to determine the origin? Founder of the Malta Discovery Prehistory Research Foundation between 100 and 200,000 years ago, to the time when the first Homo sapiens on her shoulders while carrying her baby under her arm while building this structure right here.
Building for eternity.
But I think this is great. I mean, this would explain the idea of what these stones were. But Cyclops proposed that the early inhabitants of Malta were wiped out by the Great Flood, and everything else that followed was smaller, because we can see that in many structures. Now, according to the ancient astronaut theory, what the Bible often extraterrestrial origins. But in the meantime, I'm off once again in search. I'm in Tiwanaku, Bolivia, where the Incas say mankind was created. Ancient temple complex, but they are baffled by the uniformly shaped and sharp-edged what looked like a massive temple complex at what is now called Tiwanaku. It is one of the places where logic. These pieces are so perfect that they fit together interlockingly in such a way how deep they go, and they actually go equidistant all the way down. Now, do you think it's possible that some type of a diamond precision tool was used? Magnetized. So was it exposed to some electromagnetic waves? Half a mile from the H blocks at Pumapunku is a giant stone structure called the Gate of the Sun. Some look very different than others.
I knew him personally, brilliant explorers, and they absolutely deciphered this calendar.
Mainstream archaeologists,
and they don't know what they're talking about. So the idea of wooden rollers falls by the wayside.
He said that also is creator of Viracocha.
Now what's really interesting is that the Inca also tell of Viracocha.
Children of the sun with wings, no? Pacahacas, the eagle man. Yeah. He said that it's right with you, because he thinking about 15.
It was just fantasy.
He say that they are
just mythology, much, much more.
One of the things is when you see the articulation of the stones at Pumapunku,
Stone cuts.
and the poured clamps of molten metal. Are also the builders of the Sun Temple in Cuzco, and at Ollantaytambo and Sacsayhuaman, even Machu Picchu.
Which leaves no doubt that the architects had at least rudimentary knowledge. But these aren't the only striking similarities that exist between Pumapunku
can do at this point is ignore it. That it's not something they could ever address because
it was constructed with the assistance of extraterrestrials. But my questions of what these blocks
because you need a material that has a much higher hardness.
I'm more eager to find out not only how Pumapunku was built, but why. But now I'm more puzzled than ever. How could such a large and magnificent structure have been so
above anymore? And with the movement of water itself, that can cause movement of those objects.
I'm off, once again, in search of aliens. I'm in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. And every architecture that was inspired by civilizations that thrived thousands of years ago. Bright lights moving quickly across the sky, some speeding away, and others the early American history. But he's authored several books on the hidden history of UFO contact. 1492, just days before he reached land, Columbus wrote in his log, colonies formally severed their ties to England, both politically and philosophically.
Spiritual guidance. And he had some kind of mystical encounter. He supposedly
Jefferson, and to see how Freemasonry may have impacted the birth of our nation. This is incredibly fascinating to me because these are essentially the original.
As a matter of fact, the United States stood out in a way because so many of the... He said, what is an obelisk, an Egyptian-styled structure, doing here in the middle of beliefs, whatever it is, in their art?
Now, just as interesting to me
it says Novus Ordo Seclorum, which in Latin means new order for the ages.
I'm talking with Grandmaster Akram Elias, a longtime Freemason in Washington, D.C.
Grandmaster Elias, because this has been very, very
That's very kind of you.
It's interesting that the length of the surveyor's chain is exactly 33 feet.
I think they're true. Pierre L'Enfant, he was the engineer of the city of Washington, the designer of the city, the planner.
It's in Peru. But there's also the Serpent Mound in Ohio. The
diary. He even presented it to the American Philosophical Society. And to this day,
America's founding fathers included some of the most brilliant men America has ever known.
Despite that, he read widely in theology. He can't be bothered with this tiny little planet Earth. So Franklin took it as a given that there were.
They also intentionally found their new nation on the ancient philosophies.
Southern Ontario, they're the indigenous people to those areas.
Native Iroquois. But I'm also curious if the founding fathers were equally influenced
and a recognition that North America looked like that without satellites in those days.
A Native American woman who may have been a representation of the Iroquois Sky Woman.
Oneida Iroquois Confederacy.
Joanne, what can you tell me how on the founding fathers?
Yes. And I'm not so sure that America is aware even
The
of
native
that.
garb of the Iroquois, and on her head is an elaborate headdress made of eagle
institutions and everyone who challenges authority in search of aliens. I'm in Peru to investigate one of the most mysterious sites on planet Earth.
And strange geometric designs that defy conventional explanations. Many believe that the Nazca Lines were formed to construct these complex images and shapes without a concise knowledge of geometry.
They're thousands of miles on the other side of the Andes.
That absolutely fascinates me. David and I drove for less than an hour to see the Sun Star and Cross Glyph up close, from the ground.
Do you sometimes see UFOs or some light in the sky?
Ancient visitors from the sky. Unexplained lights and objects in south for almost 2 miles along a mountain range. When you see this band of holes from the sky, it truly defies explanation. Kukulkan, a deity who was also known to the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl. Bigger surprise.
All right, so here's a hole full of bones.
Human bones.
This right here, I mean, I've known about this band of holes for 25 years now.
Rock's History Museum is the fact that some of them are missing a key feature found in all normal human skulls.
Financiado por personas que tenían dinero. El resultado.
These weird holes in them, and let alone their shape. Los dos aquí.
But it wouldn't matter how these skulls were obtained if DNA showed that they were not human.
Quarry in Riverside, California, to meet with owner Buck Hauk, who over the course of his career
What would be entailed in order to do something like this?
Well, something like that would be
operation.
They had to have some sort of survey method from an elevated position to determine.
This mountaintop right here, how long do you think it would take?
I decided to head off to Switzerland and pay a visit to my good friend and mentor, Eric von Daniken, mining colony where alien visitors came to excavate gold and other natural resources. But this still doesn't help to explain the strange band of holes. Design, the glyph looks nothing like the others found at Nazca. But is it some sort of secret geometry?
That the geometric designs of the sun, star, and cross glyph may provide an important...
Because I love geometry, and here you have, as you pointed out, a great geometric figure with the circle.
Perhaps something happened at Nazca that the natives
Conducting
witnessed.
my research, I'm more convinced than ever that the various lines, glyphs, and symbols at Nazca
in search of aliens. The ancient astronaut theory has been around for over 45 years in popular culture.
Where you look, you can see incredible recreations of stupas, pyramids, and the ancient site, and even the modern ones like Roswell, is that they all involve
Inside, there's no sign of the middle suture. Completely fused.
Back here, but there's none in the front. It doesn't have the side plates
of the sagittal suture. And why have we not wondered why similar elongated skulls, China, for example, Pangu was considered to be the first living being and the creator of all skulls, and discover that there is such a thing as DNA. Perhaps east of where the first Ica stones were found, in the Precious Metals Museum in La Paz,
In my
Bolivia,
opinion, nothing. So why aren't they confirmed by the rest of
site? They're also puzzled by an even bigger mystery. What type of structure did these blocks actually
These are features that make these two blocks fit together seamlessly.
But are these incredible stones and carvings simply meant to be proof?
And they were built by an unknown culture of megalithic builders.
You have also similar alignments in these solstices, where the rays of the rising sun hit the edge.
Language. And in my opinion, all the people in the world.
According to his theory, a previously existing planet in our solar system suffered a calamitous collision with the planet because our visitors knew that one day we would be able to look down from the sky.
Even called El Astronauto, yeah, the spaceman.
Now, some crop circles have clearly been exposed as man-made hoaxes, but others are so precise.
My Earthfile site so that you can see how they compare. They flew back over, couldn't have been more than a half hour, and here was this pattern.
What is behind this code is leaving further clues to help us solve it. Syria, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan. And above Sacsayhuaman, local women. This is exactly the same story Plato writes about concerning, for example, at Stonehenge in England, at Goseck Circle in Germany, at Bighorn Medicine.
What it's about.
If you've been to India and Southeast Asia, you can instantly...
Abraham, for example, was taken into heaven, or Arjuna in the Indian mythology was
Physical
taken
description of New Jerusalem in Revelation 21, Michelle created a diagram that features we are fulfilling a destiny that extraterrestrials set out for us long ago. So it's time for me to once again grab my gear and head out in search of aliens.